Yeah, we're going to be jumping into the Lich's Lair with FrostyPirate, who has an awesome, cool race option for us to discuss. We'll be back in just one moment.
Puny mortals, dare you to enter into the Lich's Lair?
We're back.
And we're in the Lich's Lair once more. I am a lich again. It's good to be here.
Welcome back, Pete. How are you?
It's dark on the other side. It's scary out there. I'm glad I became a lich.
You know, I don't think anyone has ever become a lich and be like, man, I really wish I haven't become a lich. It just seems like everyone who becomes a lich is like, man, I'm really glad I was a lich.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
It's great. It's great here in this phylactery.
Oh, no, Pete, who have you lured into our lair this evening?
We have FrostyPirate joining us, who has the first ever monster stat block for us to review here on Lich's Lair. And it looks like you did it up right, Frosty. Hey, Frosty, for starters, hello. How are you?
Good.
We're really excited to look over this one. I see that you did it up right. You have all of like the flavor right up for this. You have it on D&D Beyond here for anyone interested who wants to follow along.
We can throw a link in the chat right now for anyone who'd like to follow along. I already did that.
Oh, wonderful! I was in the process of doing lots of clicks to get us there. Yeah, I accidentally cheated like a tiny bit and saw a little bit of it, and it looked really cool from the first couple reads I did of it, but I haven't gotten too far in. So as we're going into it, my first question for you, Frosty, is, do you have anything you want to tell us about it before we go in?
Well, first, the challenge rating is subjective. It might be more like a 2. But this is a creature that I made when I wanted to run a basilisk in my game, and I was like, well, I don't want there to just be a basilisk. I want it to have basilisk friends, and that's really hard because basilisks, everything they look at turns to stone, and you couldn't. There's no CR1 creatures that are immune to being turned to stone by a basilisk. So I was like, I'm just gonna make one. So I did.
Oh. That's a cool backstory for this.
That is as damn good a reason as you need to make a new creature, I'll say.
Yeah, I think so.
Looks like you've misspelled echolocation. 0-5.
No.
It's all good.
Now, also, would you like to read this, or would you like Jeremy and I to do so?
You can read it.
All right. Jeremy, I just did a lot of reading.
Before we dive totally in, I just want to give a quick reminder, because this is going to be a separate segment on the YouTubes and the Twitches. Hey guys, this is Lich's Lair, a show where we review content submitted by our community under a fine-tooth comb of our Fantasy Labs rubric, evaluating it for space, balance, playability, design, and flavor. And yeah, let's dive into this monster. Very excited. I'll do the reading because you just read a whole bunch.
Excellent.
Starting it off with a quote. Always great to do that. I feel like it can give a lot of flavor to what you're going for.
Love the quote.
I can no longer run. There's no pain, only a dull, cold ache creeping slowly up my leg. It's hard to touch, and I'm afraid it's become brittle. But what's worse is waiting night after night as their sharp, chirping barks pierce the air. They echo in the darkness around me. They sound closer than last time. He
a really
clearly
cool...
survived because he wrote the quote somewhere.
Fair enough.
That's very cool. It sounds like just like the scrawled journal of someone very desperate, and that you find in the cave next to their petrified remains.
I have to credit Rex for that. I was polishing this up about 2 hours ago, and I was like, oh, I should add a quote before we start so that it has more flavor. This is what I want. Can you write me one? And then she wrote me one, and then I changed it, and then she fixed all of my mistakes.
Well, Raventail Black Talon, well done with the quote then.
Shout out to Raventail Black Talon. That's an excellent quote.
I also, and one thing about it, like when we were talking about quotes with the Seder race option just a minute ago, this quote gives you a lot of feeling about the kind of creature you're going into. Chirping barks, the creeping stone, echo in the darkness. You have all these aspects in really emphasizing this not slow, but this hunter, right? This predatory creature. I like it so far. Let's keep diving in. The Stonecrawler is a gray, hairless canine covered in patches of hard gray scales. Stonecrawlers are scavengers who prefer to feed on petrified flesh. Blind and noseless, the Stonecrawler relies on a retractable pair of frills that extends from the base of the skull to the top of the throat. These frills are highly receptive to sound waves, giving the Stonecrawler a powerful blind sight via echolocation. Patient scavengers. Stonecrawlers can be found in arid, tropical, or temperate climates. They are most active at night. They prefer to find sick or wounded prey to infect and eventually petrify for a meal. While it's possible for them to see from ambient noises and echoes, they often use a high-pitched bark to increase the range of their blind sight while hunting and chasing down prey. And then pack hunters. Safety in numbers is a tried and true method for canines, and a Stonecrawler is no exception. They are usually found in small packs of 3 to 5, with one dominant female leading the pack. Sometimes the packs form a submissive relationship with a basilisk. This can happen when the pack loses female or when threatened by another, stronger predator. Really exceptional flavor right off the bat. I really like you took the effort, and there's something that we don't often see when we're talking about items or race options or class options. All right, even monsters. You gave them the time to give them an etymology, right? How they exist in the greater world, and kind of how inspiration for the dungeon master on how they could use this. I mean, just right off the bat, there's so much inspiration in this kind of vibe, and I like that a lot.
Also, it's a really evocative image, like your description of the creature. And we're talking we're getting maybe a little bit ahead of ourselves in terms of space, but like I can't think of another creature like that. The patches of hard gray scales on the hairless skin. You've given me a wolf, and there's a lot of like canine-like creatures. There's blink dogs. There are the hellhounds. There's death dogs. But this completely instantly occupied a new niche in my mind that I'm really into. Of this like ashen kind of cracked skin with the scales. I think it sounds really cool.
Thanks.
Very cool indeed. And I also very much like the idea of them being this like, this can happen when their pack loses female or when threatened by another stronger predator. I like that a lot. The idea, and I think the white dragon actually has this kind of vibe to it too. If you look at the white dragons, right? They try and dominate other creatures, but if they can't, they will be submissive to a more powerful being. And I like that you've included that vibe here because it immediately opens the door to like, oh, a Medusa might, have their pack of these creatures that are subservient simply because the Medusa is more powerful than them. And I like that a lot. It's very, very cool.
Agreed.
Let's I guess so that was
story hook
right off the bat. Do we want to talk about any of the categories, Pete, at this point? Because I think space is a really easy one for this monster. There's absolutely space.
Yeah, I think we can say space.
Hammered that on there. Despite there already being a whole bunch of canine like creatures, this has everything you need.
Yeah. And there's a ton of flavor there, but I think the big point on flavor is going to be seeing how that text is reflected in the actual stat block. So I think for now, that's as much as we can say.
Absolutely. Let's dive up to the top of the stat block. So you have them a couple of interesting things at CR1 right off the bat. So challenge rating 1, and then beyond that, with the armor class, which you gave as a 16 for natural armor. Is there a reason you went with 16, or did it just feel right? When you're natural armor, you can pick. So
I don't know. Like, I wanted a little bit of a stronger natural armor, plus their dex based. If I got the rhythm more and it was bad, I would just switch the strength and dex and make them strength based, and then it would be 13, right? So.
Well, with
Yeah.
natural armor, you can literally just pick whatever number you want for natural armor.
So when I first made it, I was using a direwolf, and I changed a bunch of things around, obviously. But I was like, okay, so it's a direwolf, and they're usually about this AC, but I want them to have a slightly higher AC than a direwolf, so I added that.
Yeah, all good. I was just wondering. All right, sounds pretty good so far. They are a medium monstrosity. So there are a couple of notes I just have. They're very minor. But in terms of how you calculate hit points, typically the hit die size is dependent on the creature size category.
Yeah, the hit die size is dependent on the category?
Typically, yeah.
I don't know. I didn't know that. For one, and I had the hit points written down as 42, and when I was polishing this up, I was like, oh, there should be dice there, and I just kind of quickly calculated. Now I type out the 10; it's supposed to be a 5. It's not 10d12; it's supposed to be 5d12, but I guess the d12 is wrong as well.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter a ton, but
medium creatures, we're talking a d6, I believe, right?
D8s for medium.
Direwolves are D10.
Are they? Well, direwolf is a large creature.
Direwolves are large.
Yeah.
Really?
Yep.
What are small creatures?
Small creatures are D6s, I believe.
Or so tinies are D4s. I thought tinies were D nothings, just like 1.
No, tinies are D4s.
That makes more sense.
That being said, that's not a huge issue. This is just kind of from the, if we're looking at our design aspect, does it follow the conventions of 5e? That's where we kind of hit those ballparks. There are a few race or class options that the hit dice matter. They're not many, but there are a couple. Like, I think the Shepherd Druid has some stuff, though Shepherd Druid can't summon this monstrosity. But that's just something to keep in mind for a polish aspect of it. Speed of 40 feet. So I imagine that was because you're going off of the wolf as a vibe to it.
The wolf is faster, actually. I just slowed it down, and I wanted it to be above 30 because it is a 4-legged wolf-type creature. So
yeah, no, all good.
A lot of the times, that's how you make decisions on stuff like speed. Is you just pick that sounds about right to me. It's
gonna run down a person, but it's not gonna run down a horse.
Yeah, and I really like that specific thought process of considering different things that a character might have access to, right? A normal character versus a character on a horse. This might be a reason that, if these exist in your world, a party runs into some of these on their travels and decides, hell, we're going to buy some goddamn horses next time. That's actually something I think is a really important thing to know. And I actually really like that thought process. Ability scores. You didn't give him a super high strength, but you gave him much higher dex. Is there a reason you decided to really, I think putting their con as their second highest is good. Is there any particular reason you arrayed the ability scores like you did?
I think I was thinking they're just, they're not direct they don't attack you directly, right? So they don't want to jump and run you down. They want to nip at your heels and kind of slowly wear you down. So I was thinking they're faster, hyena-like creatures as opposed to a big direwolf that just comes in with strength and drags you.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yep, I like that very much. No issue with any of them, by the way. I'm just asking for so that I understand.
Are 3, 13, and 5 the same as the direwolf?
No, this is a little weaker than the direwolf.
I'm for the int, wiz, and charisma.
No, he's a little wiser than the direwolf, and I think a little less charismatic than the direwolf, and that makes sense to me, right? This guy's got ugly plates on him, and they're a more tactical scavenger
wolf.
than the direwolf. So that makes a lot of sense to me. You gave him skills. Very rare that we see monsters with skills in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. Any particular reason you wanted those two, or just because it was what the direwolf had?
I think that the direwolf has them.
Yeah, the direwolf does have those skills. No problem.
I just assumed that was skills that a wolf-type creature would have. Ability to perceive things nearby because it's a hunter, and stealth because they sneak.
That checks out to me.
If it's rare, then I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's not that it's particularly rare, especially among monstrosities. You'll see, and beasts, you'll see more monsters that have skills as opposed to, I don't know, demons or something. You won't find a lot of skills.
We never talked about it, but cool name, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any other details on that. It's just a cool name for these things.
I was actually thinking. Sorry, I was actually thinking about it today. I was like, well, maybe Stonecrawler would be better because they're like, I don't know, maybe. I'm a little torn on the name actually, but yeah, I like the name, but I'm considering a different one.
Stonecrawler
Both are
just
pretty
kind of
good.
had, yeah, I like them both, but Stonecrawler has this vibe to me of like, that just sounds like what scared villagers would call them.
Yeah,
like
creepy.
because they're kind of skulky, like the crawler feels right to me. But to continue on, the condition immunities you have here, which something Direwolf definitely does not have, which are blinded and petrified, and we're talking about the flavor of them now. You had mentioned that they kind of have this degree of blind sight, so you're reflecting that with them being unable to be blinded. And their senses, they have blind sight out to a range of 100 feet. Now, are these blind hunters? Or
yeah, in the description it says they have no eyes or nose.
Okay, that's what I thought. So they can't see with regular vision.
Yeah, which is, did I write that? No, I didn't. Okay.
That is a thing that you would need to include somewhere on it. I think there's a language. I know there's creatures that have it. They have blind sight out to a radius of this, but are blind beyond that radius or something.
Well,
like that.
So you don't actually have to necessarily say that. For example, that would imply that they have no other vision. Is that the intent?
That is the intent, but okay. So I literally wrote it down right before I sent it to Pete, and then I erased it because I looked up a bat, which is blind beyond echolocation, and it's not there. Yeah,
well, and that's the key. In 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, bats are not actually blind beyond that. They just have very poor sight. But, the other example is the hook horror, right? Has that same kind of vibe. But if you look at most plants, like I'm trying to think of like
the blights, maybe probably.
No, trance actually have. Yeah,
I think the blights have that.
Blind beyond this
blind
radius.
Like 60 feet, but blind beyond this radius. Yeah.
Just something to consider.
Yeah, that's just a note.
And also, 100 feet is a very long way. Is there an intention for why it was so big? Is the idea that they're just really good?
I think it was just because they're like a hunter, right? Gotcha. So I want it to be high. I didn't really test that through any sort of convention or anything. I think it was.
The only convention I would say about that is I would keep in increments of 30. So I'd give them either 90 or 120. I have no issue with either. I mean, they're both fine. Just something to. Yep. I mean, I don't know. Does that feel right to you, Pete?
Yeah.
Increments of 30, just like that's kind of how it's built.
Like the classic amount of blind sight is like 60 feet.
Yeah. But if you wanted it to be more than that, that could be fine too.
Something that would define these characters, these creatures. But let's move on to some of the other stuff. Echolocation. The Stonecrawler can't use their blind sight while deafened. That's cool. That's taken from the bat. Keen hearing. Stonecrawlers have advantage on perception checks that rely on sound. That certainly makes sense based on everything that we've kind of established about them. And pack tactics. The Stonecrawler has advantage on an attack roll. On attack rolls against a creature if at least one of the Stonecrawler's allies is within 5 feet of the creature and the ally isn't incapacitated. Another classic feature here that you see on basically every dog has pack tactics. So it fits here.
Yeah, moving down to the multi-attack and the individual attacks, no real qualms or quibbles here with the claws and bite. I think just from a balance perspective, you're using dexterity for their attack stat.
Yeah.
Correct? Okay. Typically, the convention changes so often between what monsters use and what they don't use. I think it's fine for you to use dexterity here, and the +5 is correct for challenge rating of this level. Be a plus
assuming dexterity.
Yeah. So those work.
Does it need to be specified that you're using dexterity instead of strength?
It does not. No. The one thing I might consider on these guys as a way of, partially because you wanted them at CR1 originally, and these are, at this point with 16 armor class and that many hit points, they're up there, probably closer to CR2, is I know Jericho and V-Bunny mentioned in the chat. One thing you might want to do is with the bite, maybe the bite is a strength-based attack. That almost makes sense to me. But especially given that it has this other feature associated with it. I know there are certain monsters, I think the giant spider maybe. Goodness, I can't remember for the life of me now. No, the giant spider doesn't have it. There are a couple of creatures that have different to hit stats for their different attacks depending on what they do.
And a minor quibble on the saving throw for this bite. I think we'll get into the whole feature. For starters, so to read this whole bite feature, when you hit with the target, when you hit with the bite attack, if the target is a creature, it must succeed on a. Actually, it doesn't specify that it's if you hit with it. That's the intent, though? I assume, correct?
That is the intent. Yes.
Okay. If the target is a creature, it must succeed on a DC 13 Constitution saving throw against disease or become inflicted with castings until the disease is cured. Every 24 hours, the creature must repeat the saving throw, reducing its dexterity score by 1d4 + 1 on a failure. This reduction lasts until the disease is cured. The creature becomes petrified if their dexterity reaches 0. That's a very cool effect. Before we get into it, my first point is on the DC 13, I would think it would work better as a DC 12 because then it's scaling correctly with your constitution, which makes the most sense for their kind of poisonous thing that disease they afflicted people with to be based on their constitution.
And yeah, the DC will always be 8 plus proficiency bonus, which in this creature is +2, and then plus the relevant ability score. Yeah. And yeah, Pete is correct. Most convention, dragon breath weapons, I think even the basilisks, petrification function off of constitution.
Right, and it would make sense that it functions. The DC is calculated off of whatever the save is. Yeah, that makes sense.
Absolutely. I like that you have also just under castings, just a description of like what it is. Right, it's a nice little addition there from the flavor perspective. You know, a disease that slowly casts the victim in stone. It's easily diagnosed by sight. A dark gray coloration and hardening of the skin appears immediately around the wound, which slowly crawls along the skin, encasing the entire body and eventually causing total paralysis.
Is it intended for them to lose dexterity at the time of the bite, or is the first time they lose it supposed to be 24 hours after the bite?
It is 24 hours after. I didn't want it to be an in combat thing. I wanted just a flavorful after effect that makes them a little bit more terrifying for regular people, but not really debilitating to adventurers. Trying to lower their like make them not so powerful.
Cool. I like that direction a lot. Rather than having, because then I was worried a little bit about a kind of a win more effect that they might have when they
like the shadow.
Like the shadow, or I think the Death Dog get it off the bat too. I remember them being really scary.
It's been a long time since I've done a Death Dog. Overall,
regardless, yes.
Let's look at this guy. So again, there is a calculation method in the monster manual where you can roughly calculate both the offensive and defensive challenge ratings of a creature and then average it. As a ballpark, with an AC of 16, 42 hit points, and this kind of a multi-attack with that kind of damage, I think this is definitely bigger than a challenge rating 1 creature.
Yep.
Them in chat, they were saying it's CR2. I don't know if they put the math together. Thank you guys if you did, but I think that's just about right. A pretty scary CR2.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying at the beginning. I was like, it's either on the really high end or like a CR2, and I just didn't know. So
everybody did do the math for it. Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
But yeah, overall, I love what this does. It's a very, very cool creature. It's got a lot of flavor. On our rubric, you know, the space for it, the flavors there, the abilities, especially how you did the bite and the castings, really reflect the flavor.
Yeah, let's start really officially doing the rubric. As Jeremy is alluding to, I think it absolutely gets flavor point.
Let's talk Pete, balance. I think given that you came into this saying it's a CR2 creature and it just hadn't been really updated, I think we're fine to give it the balance point too.
Agreed. Yep.
You need to take it away from me not having the hit points there proper either, and the DC. You're fine. You don't have to be that nice. You don't have to be that nice.
No. I was just thinking about like the whole thing, but you're good on balance. CR is the main thing we have to look at for balance on monsters. So that's the defining thing.
One thing I would actually really love to see on this, and this isn't from a balance perspective, even though it does affect the balance from a more design. Given you gave them a bigger blind sight than almost every other creature that has this echolocation blind sight vibe, which I'm cool with. One thing that could be cool is if you could find a way to maybe have thunder damage interact with this. Maybe they have a thunder vulnerability. It's a vulnerability to thunder damage. That could be a really neat aspect. Another thing that could be in here maybe is that if they take thunder damage, they have to roll save or become blinded. Those could be some really cool ways that a player interacting with these could discover something. Like, oh, because they use their, echolocation, that's something we can fight, we can deal with. That could be a neat thing to put into here.
It's a very cool idea, Jeremy.
You don't think it wouldn't be too much, right? Like with a fourth ability in there, like. No, okay. Yeah, probably.
No, I think it's fine. Even put that as part of like, and in fact, you could call instead of echolocation, advanced echolocation, right? They can't use their blind sight while deafened. Additionally, whatever.
Yeah, if I added it in there, I think that would be good. Yeah. Okay.
If you wanted, that is just something that, as a designer, when I'm making monsters, this is already a pretty solid monster. But I like to try and put things in that players can discover. And I think a vulnerability to thunder damage might be too much because that's just.
We hit it with thunder damage now and it blows up.
Yeah,
it's not really like it's not made of. If it was made of stone and was brittle or something, maybe. But
well, and I know a great example of this actually in Volo's Guide to Monsters. I think it is the Froghemoth. Has a really really cool lightning susceptibility. Where it's got it's a gambit, hit it with lightning, and it takes a penalty somewhere, and it gains a benefit somewhere else because it hit by the lightning. And it's a really cool thing that when players are fighting a Froghemoth, if they stumble upon that and discover that, that's a really interesting moment, and they get very excited about finding that kind of stuff. It's like when they first fight a scarecrow and figure out, oh shit, we set them on fire, yes! You're very excited about that kind of thing.
So anyway, to go back around, these are all ideas. These are things that we would say are necessary, and the creature works very well as it stands. I agree with Jeremy's assessment of the balance because you came in saying that you think it's more of a CR2, that you're balanced around CR2.
Playability. I don't think anything here is a playability issue. I think the way that you've designed this castings feature as more of the story is changed now.
Yeah, a narrative kind of debuff in a sense.
A narrative disruption, I think, works really well.
Yes, you danced and skirted right around what would have been the only possible design issue, I think, in this. So a hat off on that one. It was very well put together.
Thank you.
Or I'm sorry, playability issue.
Yeah,
but
the only
design.
This is
it's
tough. Because, you're off on the hit dice. You're off on the blind sight's not really a design issue. That's just our personal preference of wanting to go in 90 increments. We can't dock you for that.
Well, the thing that I would say, though, is since the intention was it to be that they have no other manner of seeing and you didn't include the deafened, that didn't come across in the design there.
Well, and even beyond that, I think there should be a clarification in the castings thing. Every 24 hours, the creature must repeat the save, reducing its dex score. Well, no, I think it actually is clear enough the way I have it written that it doesn't immediately impact.
You might have to double take as like the DM, but when you actually read it as written, it
that's the fear. As a DM, I could see a DM reading that incorrectly the first time, and ruling it incorrectly.
Well, I was confused because I thought that your intention originally was for it to happen immediately, and I read it and thought, oh, this doesn't happen immediately as it's written, and was just surprised that that wasn't the way that it was.
Yeah, it is separate, right? Because it says you become inflicted with the casting.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, it's a description of what happens. So I don't know, like how would you? I don't really want to like overly describe it. It's like I don't say, but you don't take the dex damage yet. Like what? How? I don't know how it would change that.
Yeah, I don't know either. But.
I considered actually moving the every 24 hours into the casting's description below, so it's a different thing. Because most diseases, when you contract them in a game, it just says you contracted the disease and then that's it.
I think that would actually be a really great idea, because then you could write, you have this initial description. Castings is a disease that slowly casts the victim in stone. It is easily diagnosed by sight. And you could say an initial bite shows only a gray coloration and hardening of the skin immediately or about the wound.
Yeah.
However, over the next, over the preceding days, it slowly crawls along the skin, encasing the entire body, and eventually causing total. And I would use petrification instead of paralysis.
Did I write paralysis? Oh, that's that's an error. Yeah.
It's all good, but I think that would be the way to do it to make it just a little clearer so that it isn't accidentally misread.
I'm looking at some people writing things about the con save for the thunder damage, and I don't like that. I think if I was going to do it, I would make it just do it, no save.
Yeah, I think that's the right choice.
The monster doesn't need to be one. It would cause a playability issue, right? It's like, making all the monsters do con saves. It's like, okay, if it was a really big thing, but if it's like they get blinded till the end of their next turn, then I think that would be fine. Whenever they receive thunder damage, if they take thunder damage, they're just blinded until the start of their next turn or the end of their next.
If you feel blinded is too powerful, right? Just say they have disadvantage on their attack rolls until the end of their next turn, right? Yeah. Something to reflect that like their senses and their focus is disrupted. That might be because blind is very powerful. If a player has a way of repeatedly doing thunder damage,
or blinded until the start of their next turn, so players can hit them, but then they can act normally.
Oh, that's actually better. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. So those
like a short attack. Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely some ways to consider that.
But that's a cool idea if you do want to incorporate that. So Jeremy, to circle back around to the design point, I think it's close, but I think it might be you're off on the design point.
It's very, very close. I'll give you the half. You get the Jeremy's half.
The closest I think we've yet seen to the 5 on the Lich's Lair.
I will say I have one other thing that I would like to mention, right? And that is a flavor note that you totally missed. And I don't mean that in a super bad way. It's just a distinction. Almost every monstrosity that exists, the idea of a monstrosity is it is a creature that was originally created somehow and brought into the world, and now naturally reproduces and exists in the world. Almost all of them have a small bit of text or paragraph explaining either a mythos of how the monstrosity came into being, or actual like information on how, like for example, how a Medusa came into being, or how an owl bear came into existence, or a chimera, right, from Demogorgon, how these creatures came into being. That would be something that I think would be really cool to add here, even if it was just little, even if it's just a sentence, little is known how these beings came, how such a horrifying amalgamation of stone and flesh came into being, right? Even if you just have a sentence like that somewhere, I think that would be good, because that's the one thing it's missing right now, is that where did it come from?
Interesting point. I hadn't considered that in the context of monstrosities, but now that you mentioned it, it is true.
Certainly not something that I would to some degree.
That's certainly not something that we would dock flavor for.
No, absolutely
but it's something that would further enhance the flavor.
Precisely. This is how you get go from the 4 up to the 4+, or the 4+ up to the 5. I'm sorry, you were saying something, Frosty?
No, I was just agreeing with you. You're right, actually. You when you mentioned like the owlbear and a few other things, yeah, I remember that, and I had not connected it specifically to monstrosity, but I do remember that. It wouldn't be a different monster. It is a monstrosity, though, correct?
Oh yeah, oh absolutely. This seems like a monstrosity to me. I mean, it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
It just depends on how. Yeah, if you want to create some lore for how they originally came into being, that would be a really cool way to further inspire a dungeon master running these monsters.
Maddie was recommending, and this is an interesting idea, why not bind it to exhaustion progression and replace death with petrification instead of the decreasing dex by incrementally.
Maddie, you hit a chord with me. I hate exhaustion.
I think it's an interesting idea. I think it could work.
I very much like this as it is as a disease, personally.
Well, the thing with exhaustion, like that's a cool idea. I would run that on a harder version of this monster. So like, Dex lowers your AC, it lowers your ability to do things, but exhaustion basically makes the character suck at everything they're trying to do. And I don't really want that. But the mechanics do work. He's right. Like it slows you down. It makes you, I don't know.
I don't think it was meant to be replacing the fact that it's a disease too. I think it's still a disease that causes exhaustion.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
I don't think there's anything wrong with this design. I just think it's a cool
I like this design
idea.
Personally.
Yeah.
But either way, overall, Pete, we got 4.5 out of 5.
Indeed.
Very
nicely
cool.
done. This is an awesome monster.
Absolutely.
Like there's every once in a while there's stuff in D&D time that people bring that I know that I personally am going to run this in a game at some point, and I know that at some point I'm going to steal your Stonecrawler and tell all my players that I came up with it out of my imagination. They'll be like, how did you come up with that awesome Stonecrawler? I'll never tell.
The same way everything created for Dungeons and Dragons.
Give him the Basilisk story. Oh, well.
Well, I was thinking about Basilisk, yeah. Anyway, excellent work.
You want to hear the story about how I came up with Stonecrawler? Well, not a story a Jedi would tell you.
It's a shame that you weren't here last week because I do a lot of Feywild stuff too, and I put something up to Jeremy last week. We didn't do Lich's Lairs last week.
I went back and read the Maladrin, and I thought they were good.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, that's a really
first thing
really
I did was I told Pete, "Hey Pete, you're gonna want to look at this."
Yeah, he told me to check it out, and I immediately did, and it was very cool. But that is neither here nor there, because now the Liches must cast verdict. After long deliberation and the closest race as of yet thus far, another soul is claimed by the Lich's Lair.
Oh no.
No. Thank you so much, Frosty.
You play the thing again now, Jeremy?
No, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that after we say thank you. Thank you so much, Frosty, for joining us. This is a really cool race up in Stonecrawler. Where can people find you and your content if, like, they're interested in seeing more stuff that you're creating? Just gonna post all that on the D&D Time Discord, or do you have
probably? I mean, everything I make for myself. Really, I don't post anything anywhere really. So yeah, you'll find me here probably.
With exclusive to D&D Time, folks. You're hearing that?
Hit him up in the workshop. And thanks so much, Frosty. I really liked this. And
the mark
for Lich's Lair,
4.5 out of 5.
Yeah, thanks for teaching me a couple things.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining us. We'll be actually.
We'll be back. We'll take a break as well after the little thing. Like a 5-minute break.
Another soul claimed by the Lich's Lair.
Mortals, dare you to enter into the Lich's Lair?